Hello and welcome to another episode of the midierror podcast, where we speak to all sorts of people who work within sound and music. On the show this time we have Lincoln Barrett, aka High Contrast, who is one of the world's biggest drum and bass producers and artists. His first album, True Colours, came out in 2002, and his most recent album, his sixth, came out in 2020, called Notes from the Underground. He's released a prolific amount of records and done some incredibly high-profile remixes and live sets over the years. He's also touring with a live show as well, and you definitely got to check out his music. You can donate to the podcast if you want to support it. You can donate via PayPal or via Ko-fi. This is all done by me in my bedroom by myself. All the editing, the research, the promo, the write-up. It's all done by me, so any support is greatly appreciated. Okay, let's get on with the show. Anyway, the first thing that I asked High Contrast was about his musical beginnings.
I mean, anyone who's like known me all my life, they were like so surprised that I became a, I guess musician, DJ, producer, whatever you want to call it, because I mean, really, I was just obsessed with films from such a young age, basically from about 5, and then started making my own films when I was about 10 or 11. And, everyone who knew me was like, oh, he's going to be a film director, and then I just did this 180 move where I just seemed to kind of lose all interest in the visual and just completely became obsessed with audio around when I was kind of 17. So that then by the time I was actually studying film in university in my late teens, it already felt like kind of a losing battle, that film was fighting for my attention. And, I went from watching hundreds of films a year to watching maybe one a year. Yeah, I mean, it was just, and, maybe this is to do with, my potentially kind of neurodivergent thing going on in my head, but the way I'll become kind of obsessed with something, and that is it. Like I'm just so focused on that, and then I'll move to something else, and that is the new focus, and it's just that, and that really happened with this kind of switch from film to music, and yeah, to the point then where, I didn't even bother going to my graduation at university, and I managed to sign a record deal just before graduating. So I just went straight into a music career. I was just kind of immediately touring and releasing the first album straight out of the gate, when I was like, I guess I finished it when I was like 21. And then, then it took a number of years where I eventually did kind of find my love for film again, and I started making music videos and things like that. And ever since then, I've been trying to kind of get back in the film game, but it's music just keeps pulling me back in. It's a very kind of seductive thing, because to make a film, you kind of need an army of people, and it takes, you're looking really 2 years at least to see a project through, whereas you can get a beat going in 5 minutes, and it's just, it's given me that kind of creative fix, and I find music very seductive like that. But I had piano lessons as a kid, but I didn't really take to it too much, because I think the pieces I was being taught were mainly classical, and although I love classical music now, as a kid, I just kind of struggled with it, and so I stopped the piano lessons, and then I started having keyboard lessons, and the main differentiation was that, with piano you're using your left and right hand, going full pelt, but like with the keyboard lessons, you were just playing chords with your left hand and the melody with the right hand. And that kind of clicked with me more. I really liked chords and just kind of straight, like kind of chord riffs, you know, and I think that kind of paid off in later years, you know, where so much of dance music is built around quite simple chord progressions. But I could kind of connect with that and find, you know, something I found interesting in that, having the kind of pad sounds or whatever in jungle records. But yeah, as a kid, I really was just about films and film music, not really listening to much music outside of that kind of concept, you know. But like the music that I heard growing up was all 50s rock and roll, because that was the world my dad was in. You know, he just loved 50s rock and roll obsessively. He basically hated everything from the Beatles onwards, you know. And so I think part of the reason I initially, you know, for the first 16 or so years of my life, had very little interest in music was because my parents were so into music that, you know, I think you kind of rebel against a bit what your parents are into. So because my dad was already this, you know, music guy, I think subconsciously I kind of wanted to be different, maybe. And I mean, he had a love of film as well, you know, and we bonded over that more than the music. But to me, like, music was kind of the thing my parents were into, you know. So I kind of, yeah, I didn't really find a way in to music until I was well into my teenage years, you know. And the one of the things that I did like that my dad played me, though, was there was a guy in the 50s called Dickie Goodman, and he released a series of like novelty kind of comedy records where he was doing these kind of sketches. Like one was like about an alien invasion, another would be in like a hospital or something. Yeah, and but basically he was like, it was almost like a little kind of radio play, but he would say, you know, we now go to hear from the president, and then he would like cut in a line from a rock and roll record, you know, and it'd be like a what babalooba, a what bam boom or something, you know, as if the president had said that. Like, it was just this kind of absurd comedy sketches, but I loved what he was doing, and it was really sampling before anyone had any idea of sampling, you know. And he was like cutting in like lines from Elvis as gag lines to like questions he was setting up, you know. And of course, I mean, this was like before there were any laws about sampling. So this was like really the first time where the whole copyright issue of sampling was coming into play, because he was having these hit records in America that were, you know, pieced together from these other massive hit records, you know, and they just kind of put it out, not thinking that there was any real like legal problem. But I think they did kind of like run into legal problems. I'm not sure how it was resolved, but I feel like that's a thing that like people don't really talk about in the history of sampling, because it usually begins with hip hop in the kind of late 70s, early 80s, you know, and yeah, I always found it kind of interesting that I had this kind of window into sampling, and as a kid I had a tape recorder, and I was trying to like make my own versions of these records where I was like saying stuff, and then I would cut to a line I was recording in from a record. So I think that was like maybe my first attempt at kind of like making, I don't know if it's like making music, but like I still consider myself more as an editor of sounds than a musician. So I guess that kind of fits in with that, you know. And the other thing that I recall from my childhood was, you know, when I started having these keyboard lessons, and I had one of those, you know, like Casio type keyboards that had the preset rhythm tracks on there, you know. So there was like a ballad drum beat, and then there was like a rock drum beat, and there was a heavy metal drum beat, you know. I can't remember how I was aware of it, but I knew that the Sex Pistols did that cover version of Frank Sinatra, My Way, and that as a kid, that just the bizarreness of like this punk band covering Frank Sinatra, it just really clicked with me. And I remember like in my keyboard lessons, you know, the songs I was like learning were like all these kind of like club standards, there'd be like, you know, My Way was one of them, and you know, just like very kind of oldies type songs that my teacher was getting me to learn, which I was totally cool with, because I think that, you know, I love a lot of, you know, pop music. But you know, when we had to do My Way in my lessons, I remember I was like playing it with the heavy metal drum beat on the Casio, you know, and trying to do this like version of the Sex Pistols. And this is when I was like 7 years old, I think, you know, and just that idea of like taking one song and flipping it into this other context, that really clicked with me. And you know, I can see that parallel, you know, in when I've done drum and bass or jungle versions of songs. You know, I guess one of the ones I did most recently was the Beach Boys' God Only Knows, which you know, is often thought of as like one of the greatest songs of all time, and is surely a fool's errand to try and do a remix of. But you know, I also have this kind of very nothing is sacred approach, you know, and I feel like that has, you know, put me in good stead over the years, because I think a lot of times people kind of censor themselves and like, well, I couldn't do that, or you shouldn't, you know, do that artistically, you know. But I've always just been like, well, the fact that people find that, you know, something you shouldn't do, that appeals to me, you know. Like when I did a collab with Tiesto, you know, like that really kind of went against the grain of like underground drum and bass, and just I was just so aware that you know, it appealed to me that doing a track with this guy who was the biggest DJ in the world at that time, you know, was controversial and kind of a dangerous thing to do for your career in a way, you know. But I just couldn't help myself, because I mean, first of all, you know, I liked some of the recent tracks he'd made, and I thought, well, there is something there that could work. I like the strings, so I was like, if he brings some of those strings to it, then, you know, artistically I'm up for it. But then just the idea of it, the way it upset people, that just appealed to my kind of perverse sense of I don't know, just
yeah, there's something really satisfying, I think, when someone tells you that you can't do something. There's something really satisfying in doing that thing that they tell you that you can't do.
Yeah and you know, if you're on the underground side of things, it's already, you know, making drum and bass, it's like, well, you know, where do you go from there? Like, you know, you can't, you're already kind of like in the most underground type dance genre. What more can you prove in that regard, you know? And it's just like, well, actually, it's more interesting to me to go and work with the biggest DJ in the world, because that is the controversial, weird thing to do, you know? Yeah. Anyway, that whole thing of kind of like taking something from one context and putting it into another, and you know, that DJ Zinc Remixer, Ready or Not, like when I first heard that in the, I don't know, 96, around then, that was like a real eureka moment, where it was like that kind of the Sex Pistols doing My Way, you know. It was like hearing this nutty jungle remix that was only available on this, you know, illegal white label vinyl, you know, that the Fugees were like trying to get banned, you know, from any record shop selling it. You know, having that jungle remix of a, you know, pretty smooth, almost R&B-ish type hip hop track, that just really appealed to me, you know, the clashing of those worlds, and you know, that all fits into my kind of thing about contrast, you know, of just like taking things from one world and mixing it with another. And that's one of the reasons I generally don't remix drum and bass tracks. I only kind of remix tracks from other genres into drum and bass, you know, because part of the big appeal to me is to take something from another genre and mix it with this one that is kind of my home.